So yesterday, Dan Gryder, good friend of mine, uploaded a video to explain how many prop blades he went through on a DC3 in order to go a full cycle on the cylinder. Now, one of the things that I feel like Dan did an injustice with is I don't think he explained exactly what's going on with the DC3. And since I don't have a DC3, I do have a twin commander, and they both happen to have the exact same problem when it comes to rotating the blades and a full cycle of the engine. So what I felt like I needed to do is to correct or to add to Dan's video to further explain exactly what is going on with this engine. Now again, this is not the radial that's on a DC3 obviously, but it does have the same problem that the DC3 has that I hope to explain in the video. So this is just an addition to Dan's video to hopefully explain better what he was getting at when he was talking about spinning the blades around. So let's get to this. Now the first thing is I don't have Brenda. And since I don't have Brenda and my wife isn't here to represent Brenda, I am using a Time-Rite to actually tell when the cylinder goes up and down. And so I'm not going to be using a screwdriver. I'm actually going to be using this device to make that determination. And so if we open this up, we will get over here to, it's probably a little hard to see, but we'll get over here to the section on engines. We'll go to the Lycoming section, and right up here at the top is the IGSO 540, which is what's on my airplane. We scroll over here and we can see that we're using the B18 device, which is the outer shell that is on the actual device. And then we can see that we're using ARM. It's probably hard to see, but it's 18, or I'm sorry, 18A is the device, D is the ARM, and it's going to be positioned up. And so all that means is that this is the ARM, if it'll focus here, and you can see that it's got a angle at the bottom, and so it's telling me that it needs to go in the up position. And also there's another section of the book that tells you that on certain engines you have to put it in the bottom cylinder instead of the top cylinder. This engine on my airplane is actually upside down because of the way that Commander installed it. So, and then here is the 18A scale that we're actually going to be putting in it. We don't really need the scale for this exercise, but we'll set it up the way that it says to set it up anyway. So we've got the scale, we've got the device, and we can put the book down, and we've got our pieces. So now let's go over to the airplane and see how we install these. Now the first thing that we have to do is we have to set up our Time-Rite. And so I've slid the scale on the thing, and now we need to figure out how to get this in here so that we can actually use it. And so what we're going to do is you basically just slide this cover off of here, and it shows you what is inside it. So I'm going to put this in my pocket here. Actually, I'm going to set it down because it won't go in my pocket. All right, so it's going to be hard to see in this video, but there is actually a spring that sits on here. And so what we're going to be doing, and that spring actually comes through, so there's actually a slot here and it comes through this. So the spring slides down the side, goes up and around, and then comes through here. And so what we want to do is we're going to be positioning, if you look over here, and if you remember from our video, there's an up arrow and a down arrow. And so we want our device, our measurement tool here, to be positioned in the up position, which means that we want its handle to come up this way. Okay, so what we need to do first is we need to slide this through. Now there's a hole in a certain point in this device, or in this lever, and so we need to put the spring that is in here in the hole that is in there. And so we need to slide this through and put the spring in the hole. So to do that, we're just going to pull this spring out a little bit. We're going to slide this thing through. So we'll just slide it through the hole there, send it all the way through. Now the problem is we need this thing to lever, and that's where the top of the spring comes in. So we're going to push the top of the spring down so that this comes over the top of it, and then we're just going to push it through the hole, and then we're just going to line up the little hole here. So pretty simple. Got to get this thing, find the hole. There's the hole, line it up, and the spring goes in. And so now what happens is this thing, if you can see it, this thing moves up and down, and the spring basically pushes it back in the position that it's supposed to be in. So what we're going to be doing is inserting this into the cylinder, and remember, and I'm kind of experimenting here too, because I'm not real sure about this, but this airplane does have the exhaust going up, not down. It's probably one of the things about this airplane that bugs me, because when it rains it likes to fill up with water. But the exhaust is going up, and so I think this is supposed to go in the top cylinder, but I think it's actually going to be in the bottom cylinder on this airplane, but we're going to have to experiment with it and see, because of the fact that it's flipped over. But that's all there is to this. And then all we're going to do here is we take our cover. There's a little slot in the cover here. We're just going to slide that back through and put it back on. And so we have our lever that can go up and down when the thing hits. And then you'll notice over here, you can see that you push this guy up here, and then when the cylinder comes down, it pushes that little arm down there, and then it comes back up. So we're going to be looking to see how many times this thing goes up and down, because each time it comes down is when the cylinder's at top dead center. So now let's figure out how to get this in the airplane so that we can actually do our test. Okay, so we're going to try to get that out of the way. All right, so you should be able to see the prop through the thing, so you can see how many blades we're going to count. And this guy is in the position. So the first thing we need to do is find top dead center at this point in time. So we're going to turn the prop, and my thing upside down is pushing. And so what we're going to do is we're going to watch the prop until this thing stops moving, which is about right there. And then if I continue to move it, it's going to start going back up. So I'll just show you that. So you can see that, I don't know how well you can see, but the arm has started to move back up. All right, so right in there is where this blade is sitting. And so we'll just use the inside of this to watch this. Now, every engine, for the most part, some of them may be different, but for the most part, I would think that 2 complete revolutions of the crankshaft should result in each piston going through a complete cycle. And that's an exhaust cycle, an intake cycle, and an exhaust cycle. So you've got your compression and your intake. So what we're doing is we're seeing how many times this blade's going to turn to put this engine through 2 of those cycles. So this is our blade, and I'm going to keep track, but we're going to go through this one step at a time. So here we go. So right now our blade is lined up with this, and so here goes. So our thing went up, so I'm just going to move that up so it's easier for you to see. So here goes 1 blade. So there's 1 blade. Here comes 2 blades. All right, so there comes my next cycle. All right, so right there, the prop is lined up again in the same position, and now it's started to go back up again. So that's 2 blades. Here comes 3 blades. I'll move this back up for you. All right, and here comes back again. All right, so now I want you to notice something, and you'll be able to notice it better in the video. So we just went through 3 blades, but notice the prop, this blade is not lined up over here anymore. It's actually up here higher. And so let's continue to do this and see what happens. So here we go again. So it's coming back up. I want to push this up for you. So here comes 4 blades. Here comes 5 blades. All right, so it's coming back down again. All right, so now here is 5 blades. It's coming back up. Here comes 6 blades. All right, and now there is top dead center, and notice now we're even higher. So the question is, what exactly is going on? And there's a piece to this that we're missing in Dan's video, which you probably already know if you're a DC3 guy, but or really a Pratt & Whitney and you know the engines. But let's talk about this for a second. So the first thing is the engine. You'll notice there's the engine. We got 6-cylinder engine. But you'll notice that up here in between the engine and the prop, there is a gearbox. And so that gearbox is actually changing the ratio. I don't know why this thing's not focusing. Come on, dude. Anyway, you see the front cylinder and you see the prop, but there's a gearbox in the middle of that prop. That gearbox is actually changing the ratio between the engine and the propeller. And so what that means is that every time the engine goes through one complete cycle, the propeller is actually turning more than that. Actually, I'm sorry, it's turning less than that. So the engine is turning a higher RPM than the propeller is. And the reason it does that is because it gives the engine extra power, because it's able to crank itself up and turn harder, and the propeller is turning slower, which means that I can run a bigger propeller. One of the problems that you have with a propeller on an airplane is that the blades, if you would think that, well, I'll just take the engine and put a bigger blade on it and I can get, you know, more power out of it. Well, the problem is the engine can't turn a bigger blade, because one, it's going to put more pressure on an engine to turn that bigger blade, and two, the blade tips can't break the sound barrier. If the blade tips break the sound barrier, then the prop could actually disintegrate. It could actually fall apart. And so the problem that you're always faced with is, well, if I put a bigger prop on here, I can't turn the propeller any faster, but I need the engine to turn faster to get more RPM out of it, or to get more horsepower out of it. So what I need to do is gear the difference between the engine and the propeller so that I can get that extra horsepower, but not turn the blade any faster than I can possibly turn it to keep from breaking the sound barrier. The other thing that you'll notice is that this is a 3-bladed prop. So when we're counting the blades of each compression stroke, we're actually counting 3 blades on this airplane, where on the Lockheed we're only counting 2. And so on the Lockheed, it's very easy to keep up with how many times the engine is turning over, because there's a direct drive between the propeller and the engine. So the propeller always ends up in the exact same position every single time it comes around. And so once you find the compression on one cylinder, you can literally look at what the order of compression is, and you can go in, or the firing order, and you can go in and find the very next cylinder just by pointing the blade at that cylinder. Where on the Commander and on the DC3 and on any other geared airplane, you can't do that, because literally every time the propeller comes around, it is going to be in a different position for that cylinder. So it's never going to be in the same place. It literally walks around in a circle until, you know, eventually it might come back around to that position, but it's going to do so at the ratio that the gearbox is set. Now that may lead to another question. It's like, well, okay, but if you're going to do that, how in the world do you set the mags on a geared engine? Now I don't know how you do this on a DC3, but I would imagine it's the same, is that somewhere on the airplane, on this IGSO 540 on this airplane, there is a nut up on the very top of the engine, and it's on the gearbox, and I have to unscrew that nut, and I have to turn the prop until there's an alignment gauge in there that has to align that tells me that I'm actually at top dead center on the engine, and that's where I set the mags. So on most airplanes where you stick a gauge on the propeller, or you use a screwdriver, or you do whatever method to find top dead center on the number one cylinder, on this airplane, and I would assume on the DC-3 as well, there in the gearbox there's a gauge that I have to look at to see when that propeller is actually, or when that engine is at top dead center, because it's impossible to find out otherwise. So that is the reason that on the DC-3 in Dan's video the propeller didn't end up in the same position. It's not because the engine needed more turns or less turns to be able to get back over to top dead center. It's because the propeller isn't matching what the engine is actually doing. All right, I wanted to also mention that while this engine is actually going around 4 blades, so even though it's a 3-bladed prop, we're actually going around 4 blades, kind of like we do on the Lockheed. It's just it moves a little bit. The DC-3 actually has a little bit different, or a massively different process that it goes through to operate. So the first thing is the DC-3 also has a 3-bladed prop, so you might be led to believe, well, if this one is about the same gear ratio as the DC-3, I think this runs about 60%, and the DC-3 is somewhere around there. So you would think that you would only get 4 blades out of the DC-3, but there's a couple things that are different. First off, the DC-3 has twice as many cylinders as this airplane does, and so that plays a role. And the other thing is the fact that it's a radial engine and not a direct crankshaft driven system. And so what that means, and you do have a crankshaft, but it's a totally different setup. So in this airplane, you actually have a crankshaft built, and there are pieces built off of it that each connecting rod connects to, so that as the crankshaft rotates one time all the way around, that cylinder goes up and back one time for each rotation. And so you're always going to get 2 rotations out of that cylinder, or 2 up and down cycles out of that cylinder for every rotation of the, one up, one down for each rotation. So 2 rotations is 2 up and downs. It doesn't match the prop in this situation because of the gearbox, but it's still, that's the way it is, and that's the way it always has to be because it's a hard crankshaft. But a radial engine actually works completely different. On a radial engine, instead of having each of the connecting rods connected to the crankshaft, what you actually have is a planetary gear in there, and all of the crankshafts, all of the rods are connected to the master rod. So there's one rod that is driving the whole engine, and that master rod is what is making all the other other cylinders cycle. And so with that master rod, you can actually play different games by having bigger or smaller planetary gears. Now, I don't know exactly what the inside, and I think I'm going to fly over to Dan's. He said he's got some crankshafts and planetary gears over there. I think I might fly over there and see what that looks like. But the fact that that planetary gear is actually involved means that even though the engine is still turning a higher RPM than that propeller is, maybe that planetary gear is doing something that's causing the cylinders to actually run, making the prop go around 6 blades instead of 4 like we're getting here. So the fact that he's got more cylinders, he's got a planetary gear involved, possibly 2 planetary gears. I don't know exactly how the back cylinders connect into all this. It'll be kind of an interesting trip to take over there and kind of see how that works. So I'll find out if he has enough parts, and maybe we'll do another video and show that. But I think that may be why Dan gets 6 blades and I'm only getting 4. But we'll look into that in more detail. But hopefully this explains what the situation is with a geared engine, and what Dan is actually trying to figure out. Because when you're, especially in a radial engine, and this engine is actually very close to a radial engine, and the reason is because this engine is actually mounted upside down. And as a result, all of the oil that would normally be in the bottom of the cylinder is actually comes down to the top of the cylinder if it sits long enough. And you can get a hydraulic lock in this engine just like you do on a radial engine. But that's why when you walk up to an engine like this, you always pull the propeller through to try to feel that hydraulic lock before you actually try to crank the airplane. Now, some of the starters, and I'm not sure if this airplane actually has a starter with a clutch on it, but I know the Lockheed and the Beech 18, and I'm assuming the DC-3 probably does too. They have clutches in the starter that's supposed to detect a hydraulic lock and slip if it sees one. But you know, I don't know how well those work. I know that radial engines have problems all the time for hydraulic lock. So I would assume that starter clutch doesn't do its job most of the time. If it did, you would never have a hydraulic lock situation. But that's what Dan was trying to figure out, is how many blades does he need to pull through to actually make all of his cylinders all go up and down twice, to make sure that if there is any oil in there, he can feel it before he actually tries to crank the airplane.